my brother, I've been sort of had like a reconnection with him, and it turns out that he has had a spiritual awakening of his own, I suppose, as he calls it. I recently just converted, and I was confirmed this past Easter, but he has been heavily involved with this New Age consciousness movement. It is all about, if you don't know about it, they call it the Christ consciousness. They believe that you are God. You do not need Jesus. They deny the divinity of Jesus, but claim that he was the emissary of some greater being, and all this stuff about the zodiac and not needing God. We're not separate from God. The Bible has been tampered with.
Wow.
It's sort of a collection of stuff, a lot of it very heretical, but I want to know, is there something that we have in doctrine today that specifically addresses New Age consciousness stuff?
Yeah, there is. There's a lot of things. So
nothing new about Christ consciousness. That's been around for a long time, hasn't it?
That's been around for a long time. Now, I'll come to the Christ consciousness business in a minute, but let me give you some resources first of all. So, there's a document from the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith. Now they've changed the name of that congregation. Now it's the Dicastery, but it used to be called the Congregation. Published in 1989. And I believe the title of the document is Some Aspects of Christian Meditation. It's not exactly on point, but it looks at how Eastern and New Age philosophies can be assimilated, or maybe shouldn't be, rather I should say, assimilated by Christians in their attempt to engage in prayer and spiritual practices, and points out some of the underlying dangers that can attach to these things. That's one document from the Holy See that comes to mind that may be relevant. When the call screener put the call up in my chat box, the word Gnosticism was used to describe this. And of course, there's a very long polemic in Catholic tradition, intellectual history, against Gnosticism broadly conceived, and going all the way back to Irenaeus and Tertullian in the 2nd century, and Thomas Aquinas, of course, in the 13th. So that literature is also worth examining and diving into. But what a lot of this kind of stuff has in common, whether it's New Agey or Gnostic, is a sort of there's a conspiratorial note. The Bible's been tampered with, this kind of language. And what various forms of Gnosticism have in common is this notion that the world of appearances is a big lie, and it's in the grip of an evil power, and that the initiates and the people in the know are privy to a secret knowledge, hence the term Gnosticism, that kind of reveals the big lie. And, it's fairly easy to see when someone else is engaged in conspiratorial and paranoid and fanciful thinking, how they're going off the rails and becoming insane. That's not hard to see in someone else. It's hard to see when I'm doing it. Because when I'm doing it, I'm one of the initiates. I'm one of the wise ones, And I don't know that there's a cure for that other than realism. And so, personally, I'm really given to anything that can help reconnect a person to reality. And that could be philosophical realism. It could be psychological realism, doing research on cults and the way that they affect people's psychology and behavior, sociological realism, scientific realism, anything that really helps me have an understanding of how human cognition works, the way people's brains can get them into trouble when they give themselves up to cognitive biases and conspiratorial and my-side thinking. And these are pervasive human weaknesses, they're pervasive human faults, and an understanding of how that functions and how I might be prey to them. There's a good book by a social psychologist named Keith Stanovich called The Bias That Divides Us, and it's about what he calls my-side bias, which is, worse than left versus right. It's me versus everybody else.
Oh,
that is the pervasive bias that we all have. And coming to recognize, am I doing that? Am I seeing the world through that kind of distorted lens? And of course, when you are doing it and you're very attached to it, anybody comes to you with an argument, well, they're just part of the opposition. Like, you're still enslaved to the evil overlord. You haven't been enlightened yet. And so it's very hard to reason with people like that.
The realism aspect is probably going to go the farthest because even, I've sat through some of the videos, and the weirdest little things that they'll take as confirmation of the beliefs, I'm just not recognizing these patterns. So anything that's going to bring us back to earth here, I think is probably going to be the best.
Very good.
Now, I want to say a word about Christ consciousness.
Okay.
There is a biblical doctrine of Christ consciousness, all right? And the biblical doctrine is that we are to have the mind of Christ. This is what St. Paul teaches in 1 Corinthians chapters 2 and 3. You were supposed to have Jesus' mind. Have this mind in you that was in Christ Jesus, he writes to the Philippians, who, though he in very nature God, didn't consider equality with God a thing to be grasped, but took on the humble likeness of a servant and was obedient unto death, right? So the true Christ consciousness is the consciousness that Christ had when he saw the image of God in the face of the poor, when he saw in his enemy someone to love, when he saw in the Samaritan a model of Israelite virtue. And we need to imitate Christ's way of thinking. Pope Benedict wrote in his encyclical on faith that Francis promulgated. It's called Lumen Fidei. And he says, faith is not just gazing on Jesus. It's coming to gaze on everything else with Jesus' eyes, coming to see the world as Christ sees the world. And in that sense, the idea that there is a Christ consciousness that we are to inhabit is a deeply biblical idea. We should have Jesus' mind. Now, what sometimes I think these people mean is that there is some kind of George Lucas-type force, some sort of invisible power that permeates the universe, that descends into select enlightened individuals, whether it be Jesus or the Buddha or Krishna or something. And it's all kinds of gobbledygook. And that's what they mean by it. They mean, ascending to this kind of New Age wackadoodle stuff. Yeah. That's not what we mean. We mean actually seeing the world as Christ saw it when he walked the earth in Palestine, in the Holy Land 2,000 years ago, and saw charity in the face of the poor.